Okay, it's 7:01. Welcome to Portland Urban Beekeepers. I'm going to introduce Tim Schuler he's going to speak about fall management and winter preparation. And because it's 11 p.m. in his time zone, I'm going to jump right into it with Tim. And then we can cover club business afterwards. So I'm going to hand over the introduction to Tim and let him share his screen. Okay, Tim, you've got the floor and go ahead and share.
Can you guys see my screen?
I do.
Yes, it's a little small, but I think we can work with it.
Okay, guys. I'm sorry. I have some technical issues here. Of course, the night of the presentation, everything just kind of giving me trouble, and then of course that messes up your mind. So I guess first thing I'm going to do is tell you guys a little bit about myself. I've been keeping bees about 40 years. Started as a child with my father, and then when my wife and I bought our property, we of course we moved bees here, and I became friendly, became very active with the new. Is there an echo on your end at all, Brian?
No, it sounds good. You want to turn the volume down on your computer, though, if you're listening on your phone.
Yes. And of course I don't know how to do that right now, Brian.
It's okay.
Okay. So okay, so I've been keeping bees. I run about 300 hives, and I do pollination and honey production, as well as cell nucleuses. In New Jersey, it I'm not sure if it's the same type of a climate that you guys have in Portland, but it's very distracting to hear this echo on my
Yeah,
end.
sorry. Can you turn the volume down on your computer?
My whole screen is filled. Um, geez.
No problem. We got time.
I'm going to put some earplugs in, so maybe I won't hear it so much.
You're coming through clear on our end, so.
Okay. So in New Jersey, it's I think it's relatively the same amount of temperature that you guys have, but we are um, we get a lot less rain than you, because I think Portland gets about 90 inches of rain a year, and where we live, we get significantly less. So um, when I talk about fall and winter for New Jersey, fall is kind of late August to November, and winter is about mid-November to February, and spring would be mid-February to April. And that's kind of what I'm thinking when I mentioned those three seasons. We have a saying here in New Jersey that if you don't start early, you'll never finish on time. And it's kind of been our mantra. No matter what you're doing, managing honeybee hives, you need to start early to finish on time. There's critical times of the year, and of course, we're in that right now. This is the time of year that you should have already had some mite treatments on. You should be knocking those mite loads down. You need to keep in mind that in order to winter bees, you need a large cluster of young bees going into winter. And those bees should really be fed by non-parasitized bees. So right now in New Jersey, our winter bees are being produced. We've already had a round or 2 rounds of Apiguard applied, and we're just dropping Apivar strips in now to give them some protection for the next 2 months so that as colonies collapse, you're not getting a large dose of mites migrating into your colonies after your mite treatment's been put on. So having those winter bees produced by non-parasitized bees or nurse bees is very, very important. Honeybees that were bit by a mite while they were developing in their cells one bite will decrease their lifespan by about 20%. Two mites biting them would decrease it by about 40%. So if you think about it, bees that are going to take your colony through the winter got to live 3 or 4 months at least. And if their lifespan is significantly reduced, typically what we would see in New Jersey is colonies that had a good amount of honey left in them, with a cluster of bees the size of your fist, and they're all dead, an inch and a half from honey stores, just because they ate what they could touch, and what they couldn't touch, obviously they couldn't eat it. So a lot of times beekeepers will think that those bees starved, when in fact the problem was they had poor mite control, and therefore there was not enough bees to take those colonies through the winter. So having mite loads low is very, very important. The other thing that we talk about quite a bit in New Jersey is resistance management. There's been some indication that certain mite treatments do not work as well as they once did. And in order to deal with that, you need to use multiple treatments in the same year so that you're knocking out populations of varroa mites that may be developing some sort of resistance to one treatment or another. And that is what we've really been talking about. We hit them with at least 3 different mite controls throughout the season at times when it fits our management. For example, you guys, I'm sure, know that there's certain mite treatments cannot be applied if the colony is making honey for harvesting. So obviously you have to use ones that can if you need to do any controlling during that time period. So resistance management is very important. And then whatever mite treatment is put on, it's extremely important for you guys to check and see if it was successful. In order to do that, you really need a reference point for where you started. And then you need to do another mite wash or alcohol wash several weeks after your treatment was completed, just to see what impact that treatment had on your colony and on your mite population. Those are things that should be being done now. Mites being controlled, and then once your treatment is over, checking to see how it worked. Yeah. So September to mid-October. Another thing that we want to do, at least in New Jersey, is feed bees so that we have a large population. We stimulate the production of young bees. Typically, in my part of the state, we don't get a fall honey flow. We have a spring and a summer flow up until the middle of the summer. Usually around mid-July, the honey flow is done. So we will go through a dearth period where there's really no incoming nectar. And that is when we start feeding some thin syrup, maybe a gallon a week, until we get up into September. And then we really start putting the feed to them if we need to gain weight in the colony. We typically like to winter them in 2 deeps, with about 60 to 80 pounds of food in the top deep. Yeah. So let me just move this here. There you go. So feeding to have population is generally thin syrup, really gets the queen stimulated. And I think in my operation, that's pretty important coming off of mite treatments, because some treatments can be a little hard on the bees, and having that light syrup will help really helps to stimulate them and build population as we go into the fall. Yeah. So some checklists, things that you should be asking yourself, or questions you should be asking yourself is, what is the amount and the position of my honey stores? Okay, do you need to feed? Sometimes, like in the northern part of New Jersey, our beekeepers up there generally get a very nice fall honey flow of goldenrod and aster, and very rarely do they need to feed. I live on the edge of what's called the Pine Barrens. It's a very sandy soil and has very little um, fall flow at all. So we really need to do that because we need to build population, and we need to have a good sized cluster going into the winter. So the question is, do you need to feed, or are they on a honey flow? Because nothing prepares bees better for winter than a natural honey flow. Hopefully you guys are in an area where that is possible, or where you have that regularly. The next thing on my fall checklist is, what is the size and the quality of the brood pattern? I would expect to see, 5 and 6 frames of brood, maybe 7 frames of brood, all different stages. And I'm going to show you some slides a little later on that show a good amount of bees for going into the winter, and then some that are not that good. So you want to check the size and the quality. Do you have a queen problem? Is she a drone layer? Is she just not laying well? Maybe she's old. Maybe her hive is only covering 5 or 6 frames in the hive, and you have other ones that are covering 10, 12, 14 frames. You may not want to take that one through the winter. I don't want to take it through the winter. I only want to take good ones that are going to come out on the spring side, ready to produce bees and make a honey crop. So, yeah, the size of the cluster, when the bees actually start clustering, I would want it to be basketball or bigger, depending on the temperature. Because as the temperature gets lower, the cluster gets tighter and the size gets smaller on the cluster. You want to make sure you don't have any brood disease. In New Jersey, we have very little American foul brood, but we do get bouts of European foul brood. We also get bouts of chalk brood, depending on the genetics of your colony. And so, you don't really want to take those through the winter. You want to deal with them, clean them up, and store those combs for possible use next year, or just rotate out all the duds, the bad combs out of those boxes. So when I'm looking in there, the condition of the combs, if I see ones that have a lot of drone cell, with a lot of old black, mouse damage, broken wood. I tend to rotate them to the outside if there's food and or brood on them, so that they get just uh, the brood will emerge, and then usually next spring we would pull those frames out and recycle them, get rid of them. Um, what is the condition of your equipment? Um, rotten boxes, rotten lids, bad bottom boards. Good time to replace them is as you're getting your bees fed up and ready to go into the winter. So those are things that you would want to consider in this fall checklist. When we get into November and the bees start clustering regularly and they're not flying every day, you want to make sure you get some mouse guards on. This stick here is a mouse guard. It's pretty much just like a paint stick with some dado cuts in it to allow the bees to come out, and it's just tacked with a small nail right on the entrance. That's an easy way to make one that's very inexpensive if you have any table saw skills. The other thing we like to do in New Jersey, most of our beekeepers run an inner cover and an outer cover. And if the inner cover has a deep side and a shallow side, we will flip the deep side and put it down on top of the cluster, and then put a little block of wood or a stone on top of the inner cover, and then put the telescoping lid on top of that with some sort of a weight, a rock, a brick, a ratchet strap, whatever, to keep the lid down so it's not going to blow off in the winter. By shimming that outer cover, it allows moist air to escape. It also gives a small upper entrance. And some people don't really agree with that, but I've had a couple of instances where colonies were in areas that ended up flooding, and the whole entrance was covered with water halfway up the bottom brood chamber. And those colonies, as long as they can get out and fly, they can breathe through that upper entrance, we don't have any trouble. We've also used solid lids before, and when a solid lid is on and a scenario like that happens, that colony suffocates and it's dead right there. So I've had that happen a couple times, so I always leave an upper entrance. You see the slide lower right? I had somebody who called me one time to come look at their bees. You see, it's just one little dado cut in a solid stick. As bees died off of that colony in the wintertime, they filled the bottom board, plugged that entrance. The bees couldn't get out, and it ended up suffocating the whole hive. So I really wouldn't recommend that small of an entrance on the bottom board, especially with no upper entrance. So as we get into late fall, November, early December, we want to see that top box mostly honey. We want to see the cluster, 5 frames, 6 frames, kind of in the middle in the bottom hive body. That's generally how the bees will do it, especially if you have them on a natural nectar flow or you have them on some sugar syrup feeding. Okay. Now, we generally want to combine up any duds, make sure they're double deeps. We want to feed. We want to have our varroa under control, and we want to have a good location. I hope you guys all know that one of the best locations to keep bees is a sunny exposure, protected to the north and west, excuse me, from wind, and a place where really, I always told beekeepers in New Jersey, it's the place where the snow melts first on your property, or where you have the maximum amount of sun hitting it without being in a windy place. So those are good locations. Bad locations are the north side of a woods or a place where the wind just blows on them all the time. They're bad locations. Okay, top vent and mouse guards. That's really kind of the fall checklist. Okay, so here are some colonies that I would call good ones that are worth investing in or worth taking care of through the winter. You can see when you pop the lids, the bees are covering all the frames all the way across, pretty much. Hopefully you guys can see my cursor. This one's a marginal one, if you see where my cursor is. But these are all colonies that would be in good shape to go into winter. This colony in the upper left-hand corner would be marginal. This would be a good one to possibly combine with this one right here and go through with one really strong one rather than a strong one and a weak one. This one over here on the right is another one that should definitely be combined, and this one probably as well. Both of them are marginal, in my opinion. And what can cause this? What can cause this is a failing queen. It's hard for me to tell which queens are running out of gas. Um, these ones, even if they make it through to the spring, like this one, probably that queen is getting old, and uh, they're just going to peter out come spring. If this colony was combined in the spring, it could be split off, and you could have two viable colonies rather than one and none. So these are ones that I would definitely consider some keeping them and some combining them. These are colonies you would definitely not want to invest in. They might not even be worth double stacking just because there's so few bees in them. And these would be colonies that may have tried to requeen themselves and were not successful, and we didn't spot it right away, and their numbers just dwindled down, and now they're not viable at all. Neither is this one. This one, no good. These guys are good. This one's good. This one should be stacked. And that's just looking at them from the top. The young man that helps me is a young guy. And, when you take singles and you make them doubles for the winter and they have that many bees in them and you give them enough feed, your mite levels are low. You're going to be very successful bringing them through the winter. An old mentor of mine always told me, Timmy, take your winter losses in the fall. You'll be much further ahead in the spring. And then just split colonies to make up those numbers. I like to combine weak with strong. I want to put the weak one on top of the strong one or under the strong one on the strong one's hive stand, if you will. Um, Another indicator that a lot of people may not know is if you have a colony that will not take syrup in the fall, that's a good indication that something wrong with that colony. Drone layers generally don't take syrup very quickly, if they take it at all. Colonies with failing queens usually don't take syrup very quickly. And when you notice that, you should always mark the colony, even if you don't have time to investigate it right then and there, so you can come back later and check out the ones you've marked that there's a possible problem. And if you see that there really is a problem, then you would combine them up. It's good to only take strong colonies through the winter. I find that a lot of times, beekeepers, especially newer beekeepers, You go to a beekeepers meeting and they'll say, well, how many colonies do you have? And how many colonies do you have? And you really can't gauge your ability to keep bees by the number of colonies you have, but by how productive those colonies are. And we want our colonies to make a honey crop and to also be a viable pollination unit that we can rent out maybe twice in a season and get a pollination check from them. So, yeah, don't be afraid to combine bees in the fall that are marginal or questionable, because it'll save you work in the spring. So, Varroa is a foreign invader and they want to live and reproduce. And this is the conflict. The Varroa wants to live and reproduce and make more mites. We as beekeepers want to keep strong, healthy hives. Okay. And Varroa is constantly changing to survive the controls we put in the hives. They're always, no control gets all the mites. None of them do. And, there's not a lot of new treatments available out there that are effective. And Varroa mites vector bee viruses, and some of these bee viruses are very, very deadly to the bees. So, your strongest colonies are generally your best producers, but those strong colonies are also generally have the highest mite levels. And think about it, if a colony is producing a lot of brood over the course of the season, they're also producing a lot of Varroa mites. You know, one year I was helping a friend of mine who was a large commercial beekeeper, and he had these colonies, and we were regularly washing zero Varroa in them. And we were talking about it. They looked pretty good, but we knew they had high levels prior to the controls that we put in place. So I said to him, I wonder how many mites are in a colony that consistently washes zeros. So he says, I don't know, but I think we should find out. So we went ahead and I killed and washed all the bees in about 4 or 5 of his hives. And the range in Varroa mites that were counted out of them was anywhere from 100 to 250. And these colonies were washing zeros in an alcohol wash of 300 bees. So just because you get zeros doesn't mean that you don't have a problem. And that's why we can't really eradicate these mites, because they continue to just grow and flourish inside of a colony, and none of our treatments are 100% effective. The other thing that we all do, at least I do, and the people I work with, is we use oxalic acid vaporization in November to try to clean up whatever our other mite treatments missed. We like to monitor some of them with some sticky boards. And of course, the oxalic vaporizers work really well at cleaning up mites that are not in brood cells. We try to do them a couple weeks apart. In New Jersey, we generally do this vaporization right around Thanksgiving time. And then if we get a break in the weather, in early December or mid-December or so, we'll hit them again. Sometimes you have to wait several weeks or a month until you get a break in the weather, because if the cluster is too tight, I'm always kind of concerned that the oxalic acid won't penetrate the cluster. As with any type of mite control, especially with the oxalic acid vaporization, you have to protect your eyes and your lungs and your hands. So we use a full face respirator that's approved for organic acids. It's very, very important that you protect yourself when using this stuff. What works really well is when beekeepers get together and kind of help each other do it. It goes fast, and if you forgot something, likely one of your buddies is going to remind you of it. When it comes to the final judge for do I have enough feed in my colonies to make it through the winter, we generally do what we call the grunt test, where we lift the we lift the colony and we gauge it that way. I have a beekeeper friend who um, he ends up using just a digital scale. He hooks it on one end of the colony, and all of his are on uniform hive stands, so that he can lift one end up, and then he kind of knows from experience uh, how much is in there and whether that's enough. Uh, we feed syrup as long as the bees can fly. Once they stop flying, they usually won't take much syrup, and we stop feeding them then. Typically, I like to be done by the 15th of October in my part of southern New Jersey. Excuse me. The other thing I like to have on hand for those ones um, that just didn't quite get enough weight on them is a supply of fondant for use in late winter. In order to, the ones we marked, we'll go ahead and give them a batch of fondant as the winter progresses if we feel they need it. If the cluster is small in those colonies, they may not need it. So you got to kind of pop your lids, judge the cluster size, lift the hive to feel the weight, and decide if you're going to add some or not. So for 2026, the other thing we talk about, I mentioned to you earlier, if you don't start early, you'll never finish on time. Well, the other thing is if you don't plan for the season, if you're not thinking 6 months and ahead, it's going to be hard for you to get everything in place to get done what you want to get done. So planning is extremely important. You got to get your job done, and you got to do what you need to do now. And how do you make it happen for what you want to do this coming season? Maybe you want to expand, maybe you want to stay the same, maybe you want to start a new bee yard, maybe you want to sell nucleuses. These are all things that you need to think of now so that you can get everything in place so you're ready to go next spring. So, I just have a couple more slides. I thought I would mention to you guys that I've done a lot of training of subsistence farmers in the country of Malawi, Africa. I've been teaching beekeeping skills there for about 12 years. These people live on about $2 a day, and beekeeping can change their life because they generate a cash income there. And I work with an organization called Villages in Partnership. .org, and you can check them out and see some of the work that's done over there. They don't just work with beekeepers, but they also work with um, farmers that grow crops. They work with clean water. They work with medical stuff. They do all kinds of things in this very impoverished area of Malawi, Africa. So it's a small landlocked country just west of Madagascar, and they really have no port city. Well, that's one of the reasons they're very, very poor. I also take groups of beekeepers over there, generally once a year or once every other year. I'll take a group of beekeepers over, and we work with the African bee. We get to know beekeepers in Malawi, even though they don't speak our language. We have interpreters, and we kind of see what they do. We offer some suggestions, and we kind of get to know them. So it's an interesting opportunity to kind of help people and minister to them. So, the honorarium from this talk will go to Villages in Partnership for beekeeping projects and to help develop a training farm for local farmers. And yeah, if you wanted to come on a beekeeping friendship trip, you'd be more than welcome. We're generally on the ground for about 7 or 8 days. The whole trip's usually around 9 or 10 days. Um, and you could check it out at Villages in Partnership. And I guess that's the extent of my slides. I'm happy to have a discussion with you guys if you're interested in doing that.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that presentation. Yeah, we can open it up since we're all meeting over Zoom. Go ahead and type your question or just unmute your mic and ask away. I know my question is about how you managed to euthanize an entire hive and check. I've never heard of that before. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was kind of bittersweet. We needed to know that information. Um, but what I ended up doing was I shook them all into a bucket that had alcohol in it, and the minute they hit the alcohol, they died. So just one frame at a time, shook them into a 5-gallon bucket, and then washed. I must have done 50 alcohol washes or more on each one of them. It took forever, and my arms were very tired. But there's a significant amount of varroa left in a colony that regularly washes zeros. And that's really the take home message. It was a lot more leftover mites than I thought there was.
Yeah, the sample size of a regular alcohol wash just isn't enough to capture the variation in hive.
That's true. Anybody else got a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, this is Edward Hall. How did you get into it? You said you've been into it like decades. How did you get started?
Well, when I was a kid in the 70s, my father is a Pennsylvania Dutch guy. And if you guys are older like me, you may remember there was um, gasoline shortages, sugar was sky high. My dad always liked honey, and he wanted to have his own bees to produce his own honey, and he didn't really like sugar. So, and that was expensive. So he had a friend uh, that he knew through his job who had about 13 or 14 hives. He was an auto body mechanic, and he had them in the fenced in yard at his auto body shop in suburban Philadelphia. And we he got a box of, he got some bee equipment, and that guy that had the bees told him, look, when my colonies swarm in the spring, you bring your box over and we'll shake a swarm into them and you can take them home. And that's how we got started. I got memories of me and my brother walking down the sidewalk in suburban Philadelphia with a swarm of bees hanging on a branch back to our backyard and shook them into a box there because my dad got up to like six or eight hives at one time. And from there, like we didn't really know much about beekeeping. We just looked at the pictures in the books, right? And read the captions, but really didn't have a lot of understanding. A lot of what we learned when I was young like that was through the school of hard knocks. Like we learned not to pull honey at night because that's a bad time to do it because everybody's home and they're going to tear you up. We learned that one the hard way. So um, then when I got to New Jersey and became friends with a commercial beekeeper, he taught me a tremendous amount of stuff just hanging out with him. I used to go with him to Florida for a week or two every year to help him down there, and I gained knowledge by just talking to him, watching what he did, and helping him. And then he started giving me pollination jobs that were too small for him to handle himself or for one of his hired hands to handle. So that was a way to gain experience too by doing those sort of things. So that's kind of how I got started. Then eventually I worked for the Department of Agriculture in the Division of Animal Health for about 20 years. But I took a position as the bee inspector and then as the New Jersey State Apiarist several years later.
Thank you. It's interesting how you started out and how you ended up.
Yeah. At the end of my career, for the last 15 years, I had the best job of my life, and that was helping beekeepers get better at what they do. I taught many beekeepers courses for the Land Grant College in New Jersey, and of course was very active in the New Jersey Beekeepers Association, both at the local level and at the statewide level.
Have you done any videos of this?
Yeah, if you Google search my name, Tim Schuler, alcohol wash, you'll find several videos on YouTube. You could also search my name on YouTube and you'd find presentations I've done at various beekeepers meetings in New Jersey.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure. I see a question on the chat. Are your bees in Malawi Africanized, and describe your management style? Well, the bees in Malawi they're not Africanized, they are pure African. An Africanized honeybee, like they have down in Mexico and in South Florida and Texas, some of them, they look just like a regular European honeybee. They look like the same size and things like that, but they behave very differently. They are very aggressive or very defensive, I'll say. The pure African is noticeably smaller. Their comb is noticeably smaller. You don't need to measure it. You can look at it and tell. And the African bee, if it's disturbed too often, will actually abscond and leave. So the management style, the question was, what's your management style in Africa? Typically, when I first started going there, they used all Kenyan top bar hives. And, the problem with them is the only way to harvest honey is the crush and strain method. And it's hard to split bees because not every top bar hive is exactly the same dimensions. So if you're trying to split and make increases, it's kind of awkward and difficult. So some of the beekeepers that are involved with villages in partnership now are using some Langstroth hives. And the last time I was there, we distributed some. Some of the beekeepers now have both top bar and Langstroth. And I'm waiting to get some feedback on them as to how they liked managing them and how different it was to harvest honey from them. So the next time I get over there, hopefully we're going to have some answers to those questions. So typically in Malawi, if you have a cavity, they typically would hang them in a tree or put them on a stand that is protected from ants and would rub propolis and beeswax and maybe put some lemongrass in those hives as a lure. And during the swarming season, a swarm will find that cavity and generally move into it. And then the key is for the beekeeper not to harvest too much honey so that there's enough to get the bees through the dry season. Because in the dry season, there's very little nectar for them to get. So that's one of the challenges, is getting people that are living a very impoverished lifestyle not to take all the honey and to understand that the bees need some of that to get themselves through. So another question was, do you prefer overwintering in singles or doubles? Well, I prefer overwintering in doubles, but I prefer making honey in singles. So typically what we do is we'll overwinter them in doubles, and in April, early May, We split them into singles and run a queen excluder and honey supers over top of the excluder. Then this time of year, the honey's all been pulled, the mite treatments are on, and we recombine up strong ones with weak ones to doubles for the winter. And the reason that is we've tried wintering singles, but they never winter as good. One of the hard things, as I said in my talk, is determining which colonies their queens are going to fail. And sometimes you can tell by looking at them. But when you combine a weak one with a strong one, the bees always work it out. And you have a strong colony that has a good, vigorous queen going into winter, and they typically come out very strong on the other side. Another person named James asked, what are the brood cycle times for Malawi workers, drones, and queens? They're a few days shorter than ours, than the straight European. It might be, um, like 20 days, 19 days, that sort of thing. I mean, it's not that significant, but it is a little bit of a shorter developmental time. I have found varroa mites in Malawi, but not on a scale that would cause a colony to collapse. But one of the challenges is I only really get to spend a week or two there every other year. And what I really need to do is spend 6 months there for a couple years in a row to learn really what the full year cycle is and how problematic the varroa mites are over there. The researchers would generally tell you that the African bee can tolerate them much better. They say because it's a shorter developmental time, and that may be, I don't know, but I do know that African bees, if they are bothered or if something's wrong, they will abscond and leave all the brood behind. So think about it. The Varroa's life cycle, most of the time they are in brood, developing and making babies. So if a colony absconds, while most of the mites are in the brood, they're going to naturally shed a tremendous amount of Varroa. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you. Any other questions, guys?
Can you tell how you got started with the Malali program?
Yeah, so that's a great story. So I've always really wanted to go to Africa, and I never really had the resources to do it. But I taught a tremendous amount of people how to become beekeepers, and I've always been a very helpful person. So one person in particular, he out of the blue sent me an email in 2012 and said, I'm taking a group of veterinarians to Malawi, Africa to help them with animal husbandry problems. And he says, I think you should come and help them with beekeeping problems. I had mentored him and I'd helped him some stuff, with questions on a regular basis. And I said, well, I'm very interested in going. And he says, and by the way, he says, I'm going to pay for all of everybody to go. So I said, well, I think I'm in. Except my parents thought I was going to Mali, Mali, where there was a lot of unrest, and kind of like, rebel fighting and riots and stuff like that. And my parents were freaking out. They didn't want their oldest son going to Mali. And I said, I finally had to print them off a map of Africa and say, I'm not going here. I am going here. And they were kind of relieved at that point. So I went there in March of 2013 with a group of 4 or 5 veterinarians and myself. And I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with Villages in Partnership, and I fell in love with the beekeepers. And I've been going back very regularly ever since. Yeah. Um, I've read that Africanized queens exit cells earlier than European queens, allowing African queens to cull other queens, outcompeting European. And I don't know, that could well be. I've never met any European colonies when I was in Africa, but I've only met the pure African race. I have met Africanized bees down in Haiti, and let me tell you, Africanized honeybees are way worse than African ones. Just terrible to be around. Okay. I have some experience with the Africanized from South America, and they're very, very hard to work with, in my opinion. Yeah. Anybody else? If any of you want to talk about villages in partnership, I'm happy to do that. I'm sure Brian would give you my email address or my cell phone number, and I'm happy to talk about that because helping people in Africa is near and dear to my heart.
We'll have a page set up with the recording of the talk and your presentation, and we can post anything else there about villages in partnership.
Or there's some links in my presentation that would take you right to their stuff. So
That's great.
yeah.
Anybody else have questions for Tim? Noting that it's almost coming up on midnight. Is that right?
No, 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock?
Listen, I'll tell you, I was just on a cruise on the Columbia River to the Snake River, and I loved checking out your part of the country. It was very, very educational to me. I'm into agriculture. I just think it's amazing that you can have 90 inches of rain on one side of Washington or Oregon and like 6 inches of rain on the other side. That just blows my mind.
Well, you've got to come see our apiary, and next time you're out here,
Yeah, that would be cool.
come on and get a tour. Well, Tim, thank you very much. You can stick around while we do go over some of the activities we did this month. Brian, do you want to talk about honey extraction? Can you see my screen there?
Sure. So I've had a honey extraction class at my house for years, and we extracted all the pub honey. This year it was quite a bit of honey. I maybe close to 20 gallons, and so I did most of it ahead of time. Had it all in pint jars, and we had I think a total of around 10 of us there this year. We all got to try different methods of uncapping frames. We talked about how to measure that. We actually measured the moisture content. We talked about how to store frames and prevent wax moths. So we extracted and then we strained the honey through a 300 mesh strainer, and we bottled it all and labeled it. And then afterwards, my wife made lunch, and we got to do some honey tasting, and it was a real good afternoon. I did it in our garage, and there was an awful lot of really hungry robber bees in the area, and luckily none of us got stung, but it was a busy day and an awful sticky day. And I had frames of my own to continue, so we didn't actually do a extractor cleanup, but we described the process, and that was about it.
Can you guys see the photos that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Here's a set of photos from Pub Apiary Day. Did anybody on the call be able to talk to that? Oh, I think we got one more question. Thanks for having me. Yes, thanks again, Tim. That's really appreciated. Great presentation. Let me just cover a couple upcoming events. We've got 2 apiary events out by St. John's, the 7th and the 21st. And then Gather and Blather again on the 27th. I think it'll have to start at 11 though. They're opening later. And then October's presentation is Randy Oliver, Reading the Combs, Understanding Bee Biology Over the Course of a Season. And then October 5th, back in the Learning Apiary for one more meetup of the season with Jana. So as always, speaker suggestions you can send to the president. That's me. And what else we got? One more slide here. Yep, you're always welcome at the apiary. You can email us in advance if you have any special needs or need equipment. And we'll get you set up and get over there. So it's a great experience. Okay, guys, we're 2 minutes away from 8 o'clock. So unless anybody has anything else, I will give you back the rest of your evening. And thanks again, Tim, for presenting. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you all.
Yeah. I'll
Thank
put
you
links
very
to
much.
I'll put links to Villages in Partnership in the chat as well.
Beautiful.
Okay, thanks for working through the issues with me too, Tim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out.
Good luck getting your Zoom fixed up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, thank you and goodbye.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.